Today, I am joined by Susan Lapin, who is a mother of seven, a grandmother of many, a teacher herself to women, and who spreads ancient Jewish wisdom alongside her husband, Rabbi Daniel Lapin. Susan has a rare gift for making wisdom feel practical without making it feel small. And she's here today to let me weave through her life and pick out some questions and some wisdom that I have learned from her over the years through listening to her content and reading her work. Susan speaks about marriage, about children, about building a family business together, and what kind of supportive roles she has taken and shifted into over the years. Susan is very adept to these shifting roles. She has continued to build a life with her husband, starting with a synagogue in Southern California, moving on to more public facing work with their writing and education initiatives that have spread throughout the globe. Ancient Jewish wisdom is something woven into their daily lives, and she and her husband have worked tirelessly to build bridges between the Jewish and Christian community and to spread this wisdom throughout their community into their networks and for whoever is willing to listen and wants to learn from their Torah teachings and their practical guidance. I am especially grateful for this conversation today, which is something women desperately need, mothers desperately need in our modern era with so much information flying around the internet. It's a breath of fresh air to have a woman who has walked through so many versions of herself, so many versions of motherhood, apply wisdom that is sturdy enough for ordinary days, but will weave its way into a family and help it establish its legacy. Join us today. Susan, thank you so much for joining me today on Rebranding Motherhood. I appreciate you coming. I have been a longtime listener and reader of your content and your husband, Rabbi Daniel Lapin's content. So I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you on air this time.
You know, you have one of those names that stands out, Jillian, both your first name and your last name. So I'm aware of you, and I'm delighted to have been in contact over so many years with you.
You can blame my Ukrainian husband. So for our listeners, my full last name, if you know, is not actually Timo, it's Chuck. And the spelling gets scarier the more letters you add to it. It is
But
daunting.
it's memorable. See?
Right. I'm an Irish girl, so I went from Fergus to Chuck, and that
Oh,
was
wow.
it was a lot, but but I appreciate you. Some of what I've read from you over the years that I have appreciated was how you have worked kind of, how would I say this, almost antithetical to a lot of the modern messaging around marriage and womanhood. You have done a tremendous amount of integration over your tenure as a mother and now grandmother, which is to integrate the homeschooling of seven children into being the vice president of your company, Life Codex, and all of the writing and speaking and traveling that career and life has involved. So I wanted to dive right into the how and the why and get into really how you accomplished such an enormous task.
Sure. The first thing is you said it in one sentence, but of course it's been over the span of years. And I wasn't doing travel or writing when I had a house full. I had 5 children under the age of 5 at one point. So I didn't do a lot of writing during that that time at all, and certainly not travel. To be fair, my husband wasn't doing writing or traveling at that time either. We were building a synagogue. We were building a community in Southern California, and I was teaching. So I did do one class a week for the women of the community, but everything came in its time. For many years, when my husband did start writing and did start publicly being much more in the face in the public, I was very much behind the scenes. We would discuss every speech he did. I did a lot of writing of his first book, as you know, was America's Real War. An Orthodox rabbi insists that Judeo-Christian values are necessary for our nation's survival. It's a mouthful. But I did a lot of the writing of that, a lot of the research, but all behind the scenes, because if a child got sick or whatever happened, I stepped out. There was nothing that I was never under a commitment that I had to keep if my family needed me more.
Is that a formula you had decided on when you got married, or is that how it materialized?
So I don't know what wave of feminism I grew up in. I'm not quite sure what the different waves
We can learn
are.
now.
But I went to an extremely academic school, but at that point, the assumption was, well, of course you'll get married and have children, but you will also clerk for a Supreme Court justice, or you will also be a doctor. There was the idea that you could have it all wasn't even discussed because it was just assumed. Like you were going to add on. Of course you were going to have a family, but you now could do more by adding on. And I think it took a few years before people realized, no, that doesn't really, it's not so simple. It's not that a given that you will get married and have children. And so you can really focus. So I went to a very academic school that really promoted that idea. And when my husband and I got engaged, I had actually just started a job and I just fell into this fantastic job because I was what would now be an executive assistant. I think then it might have been called a secretary, but to a vice president in the firm who was going on maternity leave. And I knew that the person who had filled the same position previously, the last time she went on maternity leave, had been hired away by another company at a high executive level. So I knew that I had this opportunity that just fell into my lap. And then my husband and we had a very quick courtship. He proposed about 11 days after we went out on our first date. So it was really quick. And he at that point was working full time for Merrill Lynch. And he was teaching many hours a week this group of young Jews who knew very little about their religion. And my husband cannot help but teaching. He just teaches. That's what he is. So his day was very full. And he said, you can't have an independent job because then we'll never have a marriage because I'm working basically from morning through late at night. And if you can't, we need to fit in, I need to fit in time for a marriage in between all these things. And that was a horribly shocking idea to me because I had, again, been given the idea, no, you never make yourself dependent, totally on a man, and you're intelligent and you can do these things, and that, you must make your own career. But I took a deep breath and I quit my job. And that was really very much against my training. And because we were building a community, I had a role. I did grow up in a religious home. Almost all the people who came to our synagogue knew very little about the Bible. They did not have a relationship with God. They knew they were Jewish. That was about it. But what that meant, they didn't know. And so it really was a community that was heavily built around our table, for example, our Shabbat table, our Sabbath table. We almost never had a meal without a table full of guests on Friday night or Saturday lunch. As I said, I taught a class. I immediately started teaching a class for the women. So I had a role in it, but it was very different from the role I thought it would be when I was growing up.
Right, because did you study the humanities in college?
I did.
You did. Okay. And so your early career, how far into that did you meet Rabbi Lapin?
I met him actually. He was my rabbi. I walked into the synagogue. So I walked into his synagogue. So I actually met him before I got that job. I had just moved to California. Everything was new. And then, so I wasn't working for very long, but I just oh my goodness, what a stroke of luck. I'm working for the vice president of the company and she's going on maternity leave. And it was like, wow, this is great. It wasn't
Right.
even necessarily a job on anything I was interested in. It was something to do with mortgages. I mean, it wasn't,
But the sheer opportunity
but just
of
the opportunity that was there, and the excitement of getting a paycheck. I had just graduated college, and all of a sudden I'm getting a real paycheck, and it was exciting.
a very popular rhetoric I've noticed lately can we call it the mamosphere?
Yes.
In communication, you have to study a lot of what's going on online. And I very unfortunately have become somebody who's chronically online through more of an analytical lens, I suppose. I hope so. But a lot of it is there's an interesting rhetoric that's supposed to be in support of gravitating towards being in the home primarily and saying, wow, gosh, my degree is so useless, happily so, but I really don't use my degree. There's another popular rhetoric that studying the humanities is a severe waste of time. And as a humanities major myself, I beg to differ, but I would like to hear your thoughts on how that showed up when you started having kids and it was one child. out of the lot actually that first inspired your homeschooling journey. So, what was that transition like? And how did you use your education and your drive in what you were doing at home?
Well, I became a humanities major very pragmatically because I had all these credits that I could use. And I grew up in an academic atmosphere. I knew I didn't want to be a doctor. I knew I didn't want to be an accountant, which
Mhm.
basically I was so unaware of other options. It was almost like, well, I guess you have to be a lawyer because, if you're not going to be the doctor or an accountant, what else is there? Which I think is actually a truth in all of us, whatever area we grew up in. Some of us grow up knowing about business and we have no thought that we could be in the professional sphere. And others might grow up, whatever we grow up with is what we know. My dad was an accountant, so that way I knew about that. And I almost did humanities by default. And I did college quickly because I had credits. There was a special program in high school where you could take college credits. So I started college with a lot of credits. And then I did a year in Israel. And those credits were only accepted they got accepted as bulk humanities. So it was like, okay, I'll be a humanities major because
Mhm.
that's where my credits are and I can get out of here quickly. But I love reading. I love writing. I love history. So I actually do love the humanities. And that's one of the secrets of my for me as a homeschooling mom was, wow, I can keep on learning these things. I can do a study of Napoleon and I can say I'm doing it for my homeschool when really I'm fascinated by it myself. So it varied. And I think, look, the skills of communication, the ability to write, which with AI today, it's a real question. You have to really want to learn how to write and to edit and edit again and edit again because it's so much easier to put it into ChatGPT or Claude or wherever you want to put it and say, make this sound better. So I think the humanities and in the study of history, we're suffering terribly from a generation that doesn't know history because then I can try anything like, hey, this sounds like a good idea. And I have no idea that, it's been tried for centuries and failed. So maybe I shouldn't be trying that idea. We have a very ignorant generation. They don't know geography. They don't know history. They don't know literature. References from the Bible. It's impossible to read the speeches of the founding fathers as we're taping, we're heading into July 4th. You can't get the most out of the speeches of the founding fathers and speeches of presidents through the years until very recently if you don't recognize, oh, that's a quote from the Bible.
Mhm.
So I think humanities is just a way to get to know the world around you.
Why I'm laughing as you're giving your explanation is because I grew up in a very similar situation. So my father, also an accountant, and I'm the youngest of 6 children, right down the line, doctor, lawyer, MFA, MBA, another lawyer, business owners. And so it's pretty funny to me, right? Because I was studying for the LSAT a few weeks ago by default, and then thought, wait, let's pause for a moment, which is, it's the joke, right?
I used to do, I forgot what the name of the book is where they give you the LSAT, trial LSAT, so you can do,
Right.
I did those for fun. I
Right.
always thought that was really fun.
And
So
it's
it
funny
seemed
because it's a culture of the family, right? It
yeah.
is because it's a constant, continuous learning and engaging, but it becomes important lifelong and however it shows up. And so I always thought that was a striking narrative that caught fire on social media because it was never a question for me if I was going to use the formulaic way of communicating that writing and studying the humanities does teach you or how it was going to show up. I love the weaving that occurs. And that is something I notice you and your husband both do when you were teaching ancient Jewish wisdom is there's a tremendous amount of weaving and grafting in of relevant information to build up a larger thesis. It runs through your writing and through podcasting and speeches and things that we viewed. And I wondered how much of that came from an academic background and how much of that came from the way we study with a local rabbi regularly as well. And I've noticed he has some of the same teaching format. So I wondered how much of that came from rabbinic study and how much came from a more formal classical education.
Well, I think what I learned, I do still learn, but I learned a lot from my husband. And one of the things he is adamant about is that he says, my religion is boating, but my way of life is Judaism. So that your way of life has to affect everything that you do. And so whatever new thing you learn or comes into, you put it through that prism. And that
Right.
was how when I was doing I read a lot with my children. My children are all avid readers. We read a lot aloud, way past when they were the age. I talk about sitting and reading. I think it was A Tale of Two Cities with my 16-year-old son, reading it aloud together. Like, I don't think reading aloud should stop at the point your child learns how to read because reading gives you it opens up. First of all, it's an emotionally warm thing to do, to share something that, with one of your children, but it opens up questions and discussions that you don't want everybody in their cubicle reading their own separate things. But I try to say, let's analyze this character's actions through a biblical prism, because it could be very appealing, but wrong. Or it could be a character that maybe isn't so appealing, but has an integrity that you can learn. Maybe you don't learn, no one is the hero, but you don't have to learn everything from a character, but you can say, wow, this was a point of integrity. So I think my husband, when he says that that Judaism is his way of life, that I learned from him, which is that everything has to go through that prism of, well, how I'm going to think about it is going to be directed by how I think God wants me to think about that.
I love the idea of the thought tools that you've popularized, which is we've fallen into a trap, I think, too, where we have to overly sympathize with every character because analyzing every character is somehow more threatening, or it's threatening to what we're trying to pass on to our children, that I can't show them any examples of negativity because my automatic response is that they will adopt anything that is modeled before them. And I think it's just an overly simplistic, perhaps even dogmatic way to view sharing materials and character traits and complexities of human nature with children.
There's a reality to that. I don't want to expose my children to everything, and I want to be very aware of their ages. But to pretend, and I think sometimes, at least in the Jewish community, there's a pretense that people we look up to are, are unflawed. And that's not realistic either, because we all have. And as parents, there's almost the apology tour, which goes on in a lot of the United States and Europe. I must apologize for all my privileges. Well, you don't want to do that as a parent. You don't want to be constantly apologizing to your children. But sometimes saying, I'm sorry. I was tired and I shouldn't have said that to you. That's a very valuable thing, because our children are not going to be perfect. And it's important for them to know that they can't be perfect. God is perfect. We're not.
Right.
And so, yes, they owe respect. They owe respect even if a parent is making a mistake. They still owe respect, but there's no expectation of my mother and father are perfect. And again, I love literature and history, because they're wonderful ways to really be able to look at something from a little bit of a removal without the emotion.
Continuous repair is akin to continuous sanctification in a family.
Right.
That has to occur all day long in a family. But like you said, where groveling is different. Over apologizing, over analyzing, especially from an adult in front of a child, I do think can give those little negotiators a little more license
Right.
than perhaps is due. Practical question. How did you create avid readers out of kids, especially? And I know you guys didn't place a lot of emphasis on television.
In a closet. We would, it would literally be, oh, it's an inauguration. We're going to pull out the television. And I remember we did that for, I believe it was Bill Clinton. And then we pulled out the television and we're all watching the inauguration. This is a historical thing to watch, even if we didn't vote for him, but it's still a historical thing to watch. And then there was a huge blackout and it all went black. But leave that aside. So we did not have a television that we watched or the children watched. It was very, very minimal. We would sometimes, at the point where DVDs became the thing, like watching a movie was a big thing. And my children will tell you, oh, we were allowed to watch 4 movies over and over and over. These were the 4 approved movies. It wasn't quite that bad. That's a little bit of a but it's not far. It's not far off either. So we did not, the kids, there were no electronics. It is hard today. There are so many electronics, and we didn't even like toys that spoke, and we did have those, toys that made noise. We would take the noisemaker out of the toy. And reading, the biggest thing was we started from literally almost day one, reading and reading and reading to the children, and they saw us reading. If they wanted to mimic, what are mommy and daddy doing? Mommy and daddy are sitting with this book in front of them. They saw us reading, we read, and it was a fun activity. It wasn't a unpleasant, can you read this word? It was just a fun activity. And each of them, we have those who read a little more, those who read a little less. But even as I said at our table, we would have a book that we would read every Friday night at the Shabbat table. We would just continue on. So there was, and that also leads to a family language because everybody can share. One of our biggest goals, and one of the things that homeschooling gave us this tremendous gift, that our kids' first association was the family, rather than each of them having they each did have their separate friends and their separate activities, but the family was the strongest
Right.
association. And when you read together or even watch one movie, 30 times together, that becomes a family shorthand. And these are the people who will understand the shorthand, your siblings and your parents. That's it.
I don't emphasize friendships a lot. Yeah, have you read the book The Outsiders?
Oh, yes, I have.
Right. So she said
Read
it's not essential for a child to have an existence like that. That is not something that they need to have, is this overemphasis on friends that they leave the house in the morning, they're gone till nighttime, that is not beneficial to a child, that the family, they can be a great friend, they can have great friends, but the family does have to be the strongest central component. And so we do have a running list of family values that are very quirky in their phrasing because they should be. They're very unique.
Yes, they're personal to you. They're not ones. Yes, they're personal. Your family's personal.
You've shared some before publicly, and one of those being, I do want to discuss two of them in particular, one of them being refined speech. So can you explain the emphasis that you had placed on that even very early in life?
Maybe this is neither of my parents. I don't think I ever heard either of my parents curse.
Mhm.
The school, my classmates, there was no cursing in my life growing up. There was a little bit I had a Catholic friend down the block whose grandmother only spoke Italian. And I think that there might have been some Italian curses I learned, but that was it. No English, none that I understood.
Sure.
So I just have a sensitivity to it, and a sensitivity to speaking what I call in a refined way. And it's they've done studies, actually, I believe, that say that the less you're able to communicate, the more likely you are to respond with anger or physically, because you're not able verbally to express yourself. So it's very frustrating. If you remember that stage, there's a stage kids go through when they know they want to speak. They know what they want to say, and we're not understanding. And that's an age of tantrums and getting upset because it's terribly frustrating to want to communicate and not be able to do so. Well, when you rely on curse words, and you're losing the ability to actually communicate ideas. It's a shorthand that's a very sloppy shorthand. And Judaism does place a tremendous emphasis on on speech, how we speak, to speak in an elevated way, to speak in a way that doesn't cause harm to others, to be aware of your words. And so that was just something that was very natural. And it literally is an instinct. I still, I can't I shrivel when I'm in a store and I hear somebody behind me in the line. Just curse words have become, they don't even have an impact anymore on most people because they've just become part of the normal conversation. And then they have to get worse. So we have a teaching, perils of profanity. You are what you speak. And that is very much what I think.
Along with a conscientiousness for vocabulary, when you brought up the word sensitivity, it actually reminded me of two values that you've talked about. The first one, we'll talk about the family values, is a privatizing information within the family, an emphasis on privacy.
Yes.
Can you explain that?
Well, again, today, everything is public. People literally will just post your status, right? I'm going wherever you are. And first of all, what do we post usually? We either post this idyllic, look at my beautiful children all dressed up. Look at our trip to Panama or Tahiti, or look at our family. Or we post the poor me, I can't handle it. I've had this baby and I'm falling apart. Like, it's not, neither of those are very healthy. And it's not healthy to read other people's. If I have a friend call me up and say, hey, I'm having a really hard time, that's a personal thing. And she's turning to me to help her feel supported, to help her if I can physically help her through this, but emotionally, certainly to feel supported. If I put that out to everybody, I'm losing the focus on, I need to feel better. I have a problem that I need to solve. And certainly boastfulness, which is look at my kids all in my kids never had matching clothing because I'm not that coordinated, but I don't think I'm not against matching clothing. That just wasn't my thing. But, look at well, that's in some ways almost whether I don't think it's designed to cause envy, but it does cause envy. And that's a very unhealthy. And there are some things, my kids were brought up, they were in a rabbi's house, which meant that they might see people coming for help. They might see people walk in the door crying. They might hear things that we're not meant for public. And so they were brought up very much with, well, what you hear in this house stays in this house. This is private. And that concept of privacy, when Balaam curses the Jewish people, he says, "Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov," how goodly are your tents, Jacob. And one of the explanations for that is that the tents were put so that the door to one tent did not face the door to the other, so that everybody, even though you had this cluster of a huge group of people living in a not very large space, there was a privacy. It's that recognition that every house and certainly every marriage deserves its privacy. You don't have to, not only you don't have to, but you don't share everything you know.
Right. And even in marriage, I think you guys have written in the past about you should maintain a certain sensitivity and privacy even with your spouse.
Yes.
Hmm.
Hotel rooms, and somehow there was a period it was big in houses not to have a door on the bathroom. I don't get that.
No.
Like, no,
No.
I'm still myself. I don't need you in every part of my life.
It's such a great word to use, is just maintaining a sensitivity. There's a decorum to these things. And there is a decorum to the marital relationship, no matter what you share together. I'm planning my
Absolutely.
third home birth out of 6 children, and there is a decorum that exists in my home still.
Right.
Because it has to, because it's good for the spiritual condition of the family. And I think as my husband and I have continued to go on dates, and there's a presentation component that I'd like to maintain.
Yes. Absolutely.
The product component. I'm good with that. I once heard you interviewing your daughter, Rebecca, and she was talking about raising 6 children and supporting her husband through law school. And she said something that for me personally was very freeing. She said, "I am doing it all, not doing it all every day." That sounds like
Yes.
something she picked up on growing up. And how did that show up for you as the kids started getting older and as you started to be able to write and to travel a bit more?
She actually supported her husband through law school when she had 1 and then 2 children. By the time the 6th arrived, she'd already graduated. This idea that I think the myth of having it all, and women will say, well, men can have it all. Why can't I? Men can't have it all. No human being can have it all. That's just
Right.
not real. And so sometimes it's saying, well, I can't have this now, but it's something that's appealing to me. I hope that I'll be able to do it down the road. And so you hear about mommy brain and yes, mommy fog, right? The fog. Yeah. Like when you are nauseous and you're not sleeping, before the baby's born, you're nauseous. And then after the baby's born, you're not sleeping. Yeah, we may not be at our sharpest. But that's not that, again, in the larger sphere of time, that's not a lot of time, even if you have many children. It's still a limited amount of time when your brain may not be working firing on all cylinders. I think it's very important to have a respect for what each other does. My husband does not lose his temper, almost never. And he's British, which means he's got a very proper decorum. And he did something so out of character, except it wasn't out of character, but it seemed so. We were we had moved away, but the synagogue we founded was still functioning. And we went to visit, we were visiting somebody there, and we were in synagogue, and the rabbi got up and said how honored he is to have Rabbi Lapin, and Rabbi Lapin started this community, and he was going on, and my husband interrupted him, which is like not what he does. He interrupted it and he said, "It was Susan and I who did that." And I know all the women goes, but that's how he felt. In other words, whatever he was doing, when he was writing or he was giving speeches, it was always, well, we're doing it and he's representing. It's kind of like the backstage crew of a play. You go to a Broadway play. There's going to be the main characters out on the screen, on the stage. But that would never happen had there not been a writer and if there wasn't a director and a producer and the scenery. And so my husband always made sure to give me credit. And I may have been most of the time with the children, but I always made sure to make sure that they showed respect for their father and that they understood that their father was working for them when he was not with them. So it's a mutual respect that together we come as close to having it all as you can. No one can have it all, but the two of us together can come as close as possible.
Right.
And at
There's
the point, and my kids may not even realize but my husband was sat at the table and he would be served and he didn't help, but he
Right.
had a role which was running the table. He
Oh.
took that role seriously to make sure that the conversation was going where he wanted it to go and prepare things in advance. He knew what he wanted to talk about. Well, now that it's just the two of us, I don't even know if my kids know, but now he helps clear the table because it's just the two of us. See, his role is no longer there to run the table unless we have guests. And then I don't want him in the kitchen with me. I want him running the table.
Okay, this is very confirming of something for me. So, okay, bear with me. Last week, I pulled my husband aside and I said, I'm very appreciative of how helpful you are because, very admittedly, one of us is a good cook, generally speaking. One of us can only cook Italian, and that one of us is currently pregnant. And so I'm not great at it, but epigenetically, I can somehow cook Italian food. So if you want Italian, you can do it. But anything else is very apparently, yeah, apparently above my head. But I noticed something was happening as the children would start to become very reliant on their daddy to pick up after them. And I don't know. There's starting to be a respect component that as moms, we have our ears to the pavement and we can kind of hear the very subtle hummings that will eventually become very loud, clanging cymbals if we don't tend to them. But I can just feel it in the vibrations of the children's behavior. And so I pulled them aside and I said, thank you very much for your help. I am not as sick as I was in the first trimester anymore. I need you to pull back and I want you to sit at the table because you have so much to offer them with what you want to share and what you want to say. And I need you to let me take over that role because it's great for them to see you help me out, but they're expecting you to be kind of a maidservant of them. And I'm not happy about how that is looking overall for their relationship with you. And for a moment, I struggled with that. I thought perhaps I sound overly antiquated. Perhaps that's not the right direction, but it can be very useful because I wanted the kids to have an innate understanding of everything their father does to provide for them they cannot see. And there's some religious parallels in there, aren't there? We
Tell
don't
me, explain more.
so, kind of like our relationship with God, we
Yeah,
don't
that we don't.
understand everything. We can't possibly comprehend everything that is occurring that gives us breath moment to moment. We can understand our physiology, we can understand our biology, we can understand physics, and we should seek to understand those things. But very small children don't understand the scope of dad.
No, it's very hard. As you know, especially if you were a farmer, like when we moved out of where the whole family was based in the house and they would see dad going out and milking the cow or planting or cutting down the trees. But going to an office, there's nothing, I'm sure my kids had a period where they assumed my husband's secretary was his boss because she would tell them what to do.
Right. And I'm okay with a little bit of that mystery as long as there is a respect associated with
But
it when there are
yes.
these ages.
And an understanding that it's for us, that there was just I think we have in the last few years, it comes to Father's Day. And what's the definition of the good father? Well, he's the one who does the things that the mother's doing. So the good father lets his daughter paint his toenails pink, and the good father cooks, and and basically it's, oh, you're a good father means that you're kind of like a mother.
Right.
And we're not the same. Now,
Right.
yes, of course, when you're nauseous, when there's a need, of course. And, my husband changed very few diapers, but he basically made sure that I had a lot of babysitting help also. And my sons-in-law changed more diapers because many of their wives, not all, but many of them do work. And that's just a financial reality at this stage of their life, wherever they are, they needed this dual income. So they do more of that. But I think we lose something terribly when we both do exactly the same things. There is a mother and a father for a reason.
And small reminders, right? I can be a bit of a weirdo about this, but I have the children do things like thank their father when they leave the store.
A father can tell the children to respect the mother, and the mother can tell the children to respect the father. It doesn't work as well when you say respect me, but encouraging respect for the other. And wow, do you see what daddy did? Wow, daddy made sure we had gas in the car so that we can go on our outing. And mommy made sure we have snacks so that we're not out with the other parent pointing out what the opposite parent does is it's wonderful. And the kids also realize what there is to do because, most kids, it's not like all like this magic, you hopefully put your socks, let's say in the hamper, maybe you throw them on the floor and magically they appear in your drawer,
Right.
2 days later, ready to be used again. And it's not magic that we can make supper. Somebody went grocery shopping and somebody made the money to be able to pay for those groceries. So you want to make sure your children are aware of all those things. Entitlement it's been terrible for our country when we turned benefits into entitlement. I think it was a terrible thing for the United States.
Certainly.
And I think it's terrible for children to feel entitled. And
Yeah.
that part of that is teaching a child that when they say, I need to say, let's talk about this. Do you need or do you want to help them learn to be grateful that there are so many things you get and you need to be grateful for them. They're not automatic.
With the socks in the hamper, it's not just labor that teaches children the value of effort and the value of a dollar. It is recognition.
Hmm.
So I think there is this overemphasis on commodification of one spouse versus the other. I'm actually not terribly interested, and it's popular, again, it's a trend, to analyze the work a mother puts into the home and then associate a price point of what it would be like to outsource that service. Sure, I suppose that's useful for some people. It's not a great basis for why you would respect your spouse
Right. I
for
agree with you.
primarily being home. I don't appreciate that formula very much because it's such an emphasis on commodification and when with what I'm doing here, it doesn't encapsulate everything. Just like my husband's career, I think it should be very well reflected in his salary. I don't think the service he provides to other people is only reflected in what the children see that dad can get for them, right?
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And it also that is a recipe for resentment because, well, is my doing X worth more than you're doing Y instead of, wow, we've got X and Y being done. And I'm so grateful that you do the Y and you're grateful I do the X. As soon as you say, well, how much is that worth?
Right.
You're diminishing it.
Well, it's like you said when Rabbi Lapin insisted on your recognition in the building of this whole enterprise. That's a very real calculation
Right.
because it includes all of the practical details, but there's so much that builds the foundation under the surface that makes your life together so much more than you ever would have been able to accomplish by yourself.
Absolutely. And that
Right.
constant recognition and awareness and appreciation, again, coming back to gratitude and appreciation.
I want to start to bring this in for a landing, very unfortunately, but with one last question. So, we talk about that mutual appreciation, mutual respect, and pouring into the family that which just needs to be done and should be done to build up the family to be all it can be. Some of that is going to be quantifiable and financial means, some of it is quantifiable in other ways, and some of it we have to really reach to find articulation for the appreciation of that. But what do you think for a woman who is contemplating marriage, who knows that that's what she wants to do? What would galvanize a woman in our current cultural setup that is borderline antinatalist at certain points and has a pretty grim outlook on the enterprise of marriage on other points? What do you think a woman would need to charge headfirst into marriage and parenthood and say, I'm not going to lose myself, but here's what I stand to gain?
I know there are a fair number of pro family mommy bloggers. I'm one of them. I have a Substack where that's what I do. But I would say get offline and get to know real people. My parents were lovely people. I was a younger I was the youngest, only two siblings. I was one of the youngest cousins. I wasn't around babies. And even when I babysat, it was a very financial for the, great fee of 25 cents an hour, but I wanted to babysit after the babies were asleep. I just wasn't really into babies. And then I had a job babysitting for a family, and I was already 15 or so at this point, and it was in a summer up at a summer camp. She was the secretary or the camp nurse. She had a job in the camp, and she had two little girls. And I watched her, and it changed my entire view of marriage and mothering. First of all, I watched the way she and her husband related to each other, and it was different than my parents did. And I said, "Oh, I want that." So I think you have to know real people. And, we're not talking about reading People magazine and saying, "Oh, look at Britney Spears and whoever, she's with." Is she the one who did that tour? I don't know. Okay. Whoever it is. But people you really can know
Britney.
how much joy she got out of dealing with her two little girls. And it really taught me so much. So I would say the one thing, I understand there are a lot of young women today who literally have never been around a baby. They have no experience. That's terrifying to do, and then you read, and even you read the positive, you read the negative. It sounds so huge. Watching a woman who's enjoying being a mother and enjoying being with someone who comes in, it works. You have, thank God, a full household. How wonderful it would be if there was a young woman who said, almost, "Can I shadow you?" Just like if you were whatever profession you were in, she might say, "Can I shadow you? I want to learn more about it." We had that when I had, it was a huge help to me. We had different girls from our community who basically, quote unquote, shadowed me. They lived in our house a little bit, and they were a tremendous help. I had a lot of children who were very young, and they got to see hands on, and they got to be with the baby hands on. You can. I look now, and what do? You video. Oh, how do I bathe a baby? And you video, and maybe you get a free video tutorial. Maybe you pay. People pay. I remember someone talking about paying for their video of how to swaddle. Well, instead, I had my friend's sister came over when I had a newborn and I was bathing because she was pregnant. And it was like, "Can you show me how you bathe a baby?" That's a whole different thing. You've made a new friend and you have someone to talk to. And so I would say, get offline and get to know real people who are living the life you think you want to live. And you'll see what you like. You'll see what you don't like. It's get real about it.
That's how it
And
worked for me. We had an intergenerational household. I grew up with my grandmother in my house, and then my oldest nephews, as my sister and my brother-in-law were completing medical school and law school. And I just learned how to take care of babies. And it became an apprenticeship. And I think how they went about it was what made me so confident that
yes,
that was something I knew I wanted. And this week, I'm meeting with a girl who babysits for our children, and she's asking questions about faith and family formation and how do you go about that. And it's funny because at first, when you get that text message of, "Hey, can we meet for coffee?" I think still sometimes I feel like I'm that 15-year-old girl changing my nephew's diapers in some way. And you get that text, you kind of look around like, "Me? Yes, absolutely." And then you find yourself in conversation, passing on that which you know to this point, and
right.
still going to other women for counsel.
And we always, when we know people who are looking to get married, we say, you have to have a what's the picture of the home you want to build? And you want to be able to point to a person you're dating and say, "This is the family I love. I love the way they talk to each other. I love the way they talk to their children." It gives you something to point to, a real people to be able to say, "Wow, that I like that." I'm not. I don't like that. And there are things that are okay. Everybody's very different. There are things that are out of line, right? That you don't want. But then there are things on issues that you may not even think of. Do we think we should spend our free time together, or do I like the idea of you go out with your girlfriends sometimes and I go out with my male friends? There isn't a right or wrong there, but it's things that just you think about that you wouldn't think about if you weren't facing it. And when you're dating, you don't have to face that.
Right. Because you've envisioned, you've modeled, and then you've seen if the relationship can be conditioned
Right.
to include that which is desirable long term.
So I'd say get offline and get real people into your life.
Right. Absolutely. Susan, thank you so much for talking to me about this. I appreciate you letting me weave through parts of your experiences as a mother and a wife and in your professional endeavors. and picking out questions for our audience. I know this was more of a generalized interview, so I appreciate you letting me be a
It
bit
was fun.
all over the place with it, right? Scattered with it, which which is, which is wonderful. And I would love to get you back on in the future and we can kind of hone in on some
On
specific topics.
homeschooling or
Yes, yes,
we didn't even
absolutely.
touch that.
I know. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being on and
Awesome.
best of luck with your continuing pregnancy.
Thank you. On Rebranding Motherhood, we talk about the lie that motherhood is a trap and that if you are in a situation where you need support, then no one will be there to help you or to be a steady voice for you. I want to talk to you about our Project Love Line that decimates that lie and helps women get real help in real time. We connect women with resources, or if we can't find one, we become the resource. So if you, someone you know, needs to access our hotline, you can visit us at loveline.com. And if you want to volunteer, if you want to be that steady voice in someone's life, we would love to talk to you about your heart for helping mothers. Thank you.